You know what finally pushed me over the edge? I was standing in the finish aisle at the hardware store, reading the back of a can of wood stain, and the warning label was longer than some of the articles in my woodworking magazines. Harmful vapors. Use only in well-ventilated areas. May cause damage to central nervous system with prolonged exposure. And I thought, I'm paying $28 a quart to poison myself in my own shop. That same week, I happened to be reading about how traditional Japanese craftsmen finish wood on their temples and shrines. Some of these structures are over 1,000 years old and the wood still looks incredible. No polyurethane, no chemical stains, no toxic fumes. Just natural treatments made from things like unripe persimmons and rusty iron, and most of it you can make at home for almost nothing. Today I'm going to walk you through 5 Japanese wood treatments that the big hardware companies would rather you never learned, because once you see how well these work, you'll have a hard time going back to that chemical aisle. Plus, stick around to the end, because I'll show you a dead simple test strip method that takes all the guesswork out of natural finishes before you commit to a single board. Let's get into it. What we're talking about today are plant-based and mineral-based wood treatments that Japanese craftsmen have been using for centuries. These aren't novelty tricks. They're proven systems that protect wood, bring out stunning color, and do it all without the toxic chemistry that lines the shelves at your local big box store. Once you understand the thinking behind them, you'll realize how much we've been overcomplicating wood finishing in the West. So let me start with where these methods come from and why they deserve your attention. Traditional Japanese woodworking has always had a different relationship with finishes than what most of us grew up with. In Japan, wood isn't just a building material. It's treated almost like a living thing, even after it's been milled and shaped. The craftsmen who built the great temples and shrines in places like Kyoto and Nara weren't working with lumber yards and chemical suppliers. They were working with what the land gave them. Persimmon trees grew everywhere. Iron was available from tool making. Rice was a dietary staple, which meant rice paste was always on hand. Tung trees provided oil. Beeswax came from local hives. And fire, well, fire was the most available tool of all. What strikes me about these craftsmen is that they didn't see finishing as a separate step tacked on at the end. It was part of the design from the beginning. They chose their wood species, their joinery, and their finish together as a system. And they understood something that I think we've lost sight of. The best finish isn't the one that sits on top of the wood like a plastic shell. It's the one that becomes part of the wood itself. That's the thread that runs through every method. I'm about to show you. These treatments don't just coat the surface. They chemically bond with the fibers, change the wood at a cellular level, and create protection that actually improves with age instead of peeling and cracking. Let me show you what I mean. The first treatment is called kakishibu, and it's made from the juice of unripe persimmons. When I first heard about this, I thought there was no way fruit juice could be a serious wood finish. But kakishibu has been used in Japan for over 1,000 years, not just on furniture, but on paper, fabric, fishing nets, and entire building exteriors. Here's how it works. You take unripe persimmons, the green, astringent kind that would make your mouth pucker, and you crush them into a pulp. That pulp gets mixed with a small amount of water and then left to ferment in a sealed container for at least 1 year. Some craftsmen age it for 3 to 5 years. What happens during fermentation is that the tannins in the persimmon concentrate and develop. When you strain out the solids, you're left with a thin, reddish-brown liquid that doesn't look like much. But when you brush it onto bare wood, something remarkable happens. The tannins bond with the cellulose fibers in the wood, and over the next few days, as the finish is exposed to sunlight, it darkens and deepens into a rich, warm amber that you simply cannot replicate with synthetic stain. I brushed kakishibu onto a piece of white oak and set it near a south-facing window. After about 5 days, the color had shifted from a pale wash to a deep reddish-brown, that looked like the wood had been aged 50 years. And here's the part that really got me. It's also naturally water-resistant, antimicrobial, and it actually gets harder and more protective over time. A quart of commercial wood stain gives you a surface coating that will eventually wear off. Kakishibu becomes part of the wood permanently. The second treatment is called tetsuguro, or iron acetate, and this, one you can make in your kitchen tonight. Take a glass jar, fill it about halfway with plain white vinegar, and drop in a pad of steel wool. Leave the lid slightly loose so gas can escape, and let it sit for 5 to 7 days. What happens is the acetic acid in the vinegar dissolves the iron in the steel wool, creating a solution of iron acetate. When you brush this onto wood that contains tannins like white oak, walnut, or cherry, the iron reacts with the tannins and turns the wood a deep, rich gray or ebony color, depending on the species and how many coats you apply. This isn't a surface stain, it's a chemical reaction that changes the color of the wood fibers themselves. The color goes deep, it won't sand off easily, and it's completely non-toxic. Japanese craftsmen used this to age wood artificially, to create contrast between different parts of a piece, or to give fresh lumber the appearance of timber that had weathered for decades. I made my first batch with about $2 worth of vinegar and a single steel wool pad. That gave me enough iron acetate to finish an entire bookcase. Compare that to $40 or $50 worth of commercial ebony stain, and you start to understand why the hardware companies aren't exactly advertising this on their end caps. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these ancient methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Kenji's Workshop, and it is a collection of 100 ancient Eastern woodworking secrets for the modern craftsman. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. The third treatment is one you may have heard of, shosugi ban, which is the practice of charring wood with fire to preserve it. But most of what I see online about shosugi ban is done wrong, so let me explain what the Japanese craftsmen actually do. The traditional method uses Japanese cedar planks, which are similar to our Western red cedar. 3 boards are clamped together into a triangular chimney shape, and a fire is lit at the bottom. The heat rises through the chimney and chars the interior faces evenly to a depth of about 1/16 of an inch. The key is controlling the burn. You want a consistent alligator skin texture across the surface, not a scorched, flaky mess. After charring, the boards are quenched with water, then brushed with a stiff wire brush to remove loose carbon. What you're left with is a surface that is naturally resistant to rot, insects, moisture, and even fire. The carbon layer acts as a permanent barrier. Japanese buildings treated with shosugi ban have exterior wood that has lasted 80 to 100 years without any additional finish or maintenance. The mistake most people make is using a propane torch and waving it over the surface unevenly. That gives you an inconsistent char that flakes off and doesn't provide real protection. If you want to do this properly, build the chimney, control the burn, and take your time with the brushing afterward. The texture and depth of color you get from a proper shosugi ban treatment is absolutely stunning, and the wood is essentially bulletproof against the elements. The fourth treatment combines 2 ingredients that were staples in every Japanese household: rice paste and natural mineral pigments. The craftsman would cook rice into a thick, sticky paste, mix in finely ground mineral pigments like iron oxide for reds or carbon black for dark tones, and brush this mixture onto wood as both a colorant and a sealer. The rice starch acts as a natural binder that carries the pigment into the grain and then hardens as it dries. This was commonly used on interior woodwork, furniture, and decorative screens. What I find clever about this method is how adjustable it is. You control the color by choosing your pigment. You control the opacity by adjusting how much pigment you mix in. And you control the sheen by how many coats you apply and whether you buff the final coat. I tried this on a piece of poplar using iron oxide pigment that I bought for about $6 a pound, which is enough pigment to finish dozens of projects. The finish dried to a smooth, matte surface with a warm terracotta tone that looked like something out of a museum. And because the binder is just rice starch, there are zero fumes. You could do this finishing work at your kitchen table if you wanted to. The fifth treatment is a combination of tung oil and beeswax applied as a final barrier coat. Tung oil has been used across East Asia for thousands of years. It comes from the nut of the tung tree, and unlike linseed oil, it dries to a hard, waterproof film without turning yellow over time. Japanese craftsmen would apply thin coats of pure tung oil, letting each coat cure for 24 to 48 hours before applying the next. 3 to 4 coats was typical. Once the final coat cured, they would rub the surface with a mixture of beeswax dissolved in a small amount of warmed tung oil. This gave the wood a soft, satiny luster and an additional layer of moisture protection. The beauty of this finish is how it feels. It doesn't feel like plastic the way polyurethane does. It feels like wood, but smoother and warmer, and it's completely food safe, which makes it perfect for cutting boards, serving trays, kitchen utensils, and anything that's going to be handled frequently. A pint of pure tung oil runs about $12 to $15, and a block of beeswax costs maybe $5. That's enough to finish multiple large projects. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years, things I used to do myself, that these traditional methods handle completely differently. The first pattern is reaching for a synthetic stain by default. Most of us do it because that's what the store sells, and it's what we've always used. But every synthetic stain I've ever used sits on top of the wood like paint. It obscures the grain instead of enhancing it. The Japanese treatments I just showed you actually react with the wood and bring out its natural character in ways that synthetic stain simply cannot. The second pattern is assuming that a good finish has to smell bad. I spent years thinking that if a finish didn't have strong fumes, it probably wasn't strong enough to protect the wood. That's completely backwards. Kakishibu, iron acetate, rice paste, and tung oil all cure to durable, long-lasting finishes with little to no odor. I can apply any of them in my shop in the middle of winter with the doors closed and never feel lightheaded. The third pattern is throwing money at the problem. I used to buy specialty finishes, expensive wipe-on products, name-brand stains, and I was spending hundreds of dollars a year on finishing supplies alone, since I switched to making most of my own. Treatments, my finishing costs have dropped to almost nothing. A jar of vinegar and steel wool costs $2 and finishes an entire piece of furniture. The fourth pattern is treating finishing as an afterthought. Most of us build the project first and then figure out the finish at the end. The Japanese approach taught me to choose the finish first and let that decision inform everything else, the wood species, the surface preparation, even the joinery. When you think about finishing from the beginning, the whole project comes together more cohesively. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This one is specifically for iron acetate, because the biggest fear people have with natural finishes is not knowing what color they're going to get. Here's what I do. Before I start any project where I plan to use iron acetate, I take a scrap piece of the exact wood I'll be using and rip it into small test strips about 1 inch wide and 6 inches long. I brush 1 coat of iron acetate on the first strip, 2 coats on the second, 3 on the third, and so on. Then I let them dry overnight. By the next morning, I have a perfect color chart that shows me exactly how that species reacts to iron acetate at different concentrations. White oak goes steel gray in 1 coat and nearly black in 3. Cherry turns a dusty purple gray that's unlike anything you can buy in a can. Maple barely changes because it's low in tannins, But if you brush on a coat of strong black tea first to add tannins, then follow with iron acetate, you get a beautiful warm gray. This test strip method takes 10 minutes and completely removes the guesswork. I keep my test strips in a labeled envelope so I can reference them anytime I'm planning a new project. It's the kind of simple, practical habit that saves you from expensive mistakes and gives you total control over your color. Before we wrap up, if today's video taught you something new, imagine having 100 techniques like this at your fingertips. That is exactly what Kenji's workshop is. It is my collection of Ancient Eastern Woodworking Secrets for the Modern Craftsman, all in one place, with detailed photos and clear instructions. You can get your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time.